Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Q&A Cafe for Business by Design. We're here with Alex Waddell. Today, he'll go through financial reporting structure and, of course, by design. This is part of a two-part series. He'll explain more about that, but if you'd like to hear more at the end, the second part will be next week on Wednesday, October 21st at the same time, same place. So we'll see you then. You can have those registration details through the automatic email that sends through this. Go to webinar tool that we use. Once this is done, I think within 2 days of this session being done, so you'll get that. Or you can also go on our website under our resources page, scroll all the way to the bottom, and that's where all of our Q&A cafes are held with the registration links. We are recording this session, so everybody will stay on mute, but you can put in your questions or anything like that into the questions box or the chat box, whichever one is easiest for you, and we'll get through them throughout the duration of the session. So without further ado, I will put myself on mute and hand over to Alex.
Thanks, Kayla. So welcome, everybody. As Kayla mentioned, and I apologize, probably our marketing was not very clear on this, so I'm going to break this into two separate sessions. Today, we're going to cover the balance sheet and the financial reporting structure for the balance sheet, which will lay a good foundation for next week, where we'll talk about how to create the income statement, which is a bit more complex because it relies on some additional concepts that we won't get to today. So as Kayla mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat panel or the question panel. Type your questions as you go. I'm kind of keeping an eye on it. If I don't notice them, we will definitely go back and answer them at the end, but I'm happy to pause and ask for your questions along the way. So financial reporting structures, if you've attended any of our previous sessions on reporting in the system, you probably have some basic understanding how to run reports. And that's not really what we're about today. So we will look at that really quickly. We're going to go in and run a financial statement, but we're going to talk a little bit more about the underlying structure that is supporting these reports, because that's different than other reports in the system. So when we run something like a GL account line balance, that's relying on a table structure that's been pre-built for you in the system, whereas the financial statement is relying on a structure that essentially has an expansive nature in that you can create subtotals and subcategories and then roll things up as you would expect to see in an income statement or a balance sheet or a statement of cash flow. But the actual experience of running the report is very similar. So the mechanics work the same way. If I want to go in and generate a balance sheet in the system, and I'll just sort of cheat here and run one of my pre-built selections. So here's an Amica balance sheet. And I could do this maybe as a company comparative. So it brings in my two companies side by side. And you can see in this particular report, and depending which structure you want to run, is available to you inside the report itself. So when we talk about these financial reporting structures, that's what we're going to focus on today, is how to get in and how to modify those. This is where you're invoking them on the report. So whether you're running a balance sheet or an income statement or a cash flow, you go into the same place, and by simply changing this one field is going to drastically change the output of the report. So of course, if I were to take this into an income statement, you're going to get a very different roll-up. So your view is the same as far as how you want to do your comparatives, but when it comes to your selection, your actual retrieval on this one single element in your view, which is called the balance and income statement item, and how these items roll up, is all controlled by that underlying structure. So with that, let's talk a little bit about where you would go to find that structure in the system. So I'm going to go into our fine-tuning activities. You need to have a system administrator access to get into this. So I'm going to assume that you do. If you don't, feel free to reach out to your administrator, or you can get us to help you with that. And then under your activities, and depending on the status of your project in the system, very likely you're going in and seeing a screen similar to what I'm seeing right now. You may be going in through a slightly different method, but you would search on the same activity which I just search on the word financial with an asterisk behind it, and it brings up all three of these conveniently. And these all sort of work together. So next week we will talk a little bit about the functional area determinations, the function of expense. Today we'll focus on the balance sheet. And so to get to those financial reporting structures, you're going to be looking for this particular item, which is financial reporting structures for cost center management accounting. And once you open that, you should see a list of all of the reporting structures that have been created for you in the system. Or you can also create new ones. I'll talk about that in a moment. But for now, let's just go in and look at some of the ones that are here. So you can see that this demo environment that I have has a fairly complex setup because I have actually multiple companies and multiple charts of accounts. So I have an IFRS chart of accounts, I have a US chart of accounts, and because financial reporting has some changes between IFRS and US GAAP, you may potentially have completely independent financial statements like I have here. And the system does support the ability to do that. It also supports the ability for you to have multiple versions of the same report. So for example, I could have a second balance sheet that rolls things up differently for some other purpose, like maybe for lenders or your bank or something like that. So when it comes to actually examining the structure, you're going to highlight the row of the one we want. So we're going to look at the balance sheet today, and I'm going to choose the edit button. And we're just going to give it a second. It does take a second to come up. So if you see that no records found, like a flash there for a moment, just be patient. And then what you can do is you can start expanding your way down through the structure to see the different variables that make it up. So each one of these rows are essentially a header that is subtotaling data in the system for you in the report. So balance sheets are very standard, I mean, across the world. So typically, it's going to be assets and liabilities and equity sort of at your first indentation. And then at level 2, you kind of get down to this level where you're current and non-current. And then your liabilities could be the same way, current and long-term. And you can see here, you don't have to have things at the same indentation. So we don't in this particular one. So if you're expanding kind of the level 2, you're at this level under assets, but your liabilities, because you've also got equity rolling up, your current and long-term are a level deeper. So you can kind of just continue that way. Now, this particular structure is an SAP out-of-the-box structure. You can install this report or you can build one from scratch. But typically for something like a balance sheet, it saves you a lot of time if you just use the out-of-the-box one and then just start modifying it. So for example, when we get down to the next level, this is where we start getting into the GL accounts. So balance sheets, very straightforward because they just assign a general ledger account. When it comes to an area where you don't see an expander, so like this accounts receivable affiliated, that's telling us that no accounts have been assigned there. So if you do want to add account assignments, you would choose on the action button, and it's a little bit hidden, and then you would go to the assign accounts. And at this point, the system is going to bring up any accounts that have been created in the system that have not yet been assigned to the reporting structure. So this is very useful because at a glance, you can see anything that has essentially not been put into the system. So by simply choosing this checkbox, I would add it to that structure. Alternatively, if I don't have any accounts there, I could decide to remove this. Maybe this is part of my template and this doesn't apply to my business. So I can just do that by choosing the delete row button. So make sure you're highlighting the row that you want, and then you'll choose the delete row. And then if we want to assign accounts to an already existing structure, you can simply go into your actions button here. So let's say I saw a prepaid account that was created. So you can actually see here the system is also showing us the ones that have already been assigned. So if you wanted to remove something from the structure, you could simply click on the box. So very simple process to add and remove accounts to that balance sheet structure. And then as far as moving things around, you have some options here like move up, move down. If you wanted your prepaids to, for example, be above your inventories or even higher up, you can just keep clicking on that to move those structures around. You also have the ability to increase and decrease indents. So if you want to take things and put them underneath other items, you could do things like that. These particular ones, expand all and collapse all, are useful when you first go in. So if you want, when you first come in, it looks like that. If you choose the expand all, it's just going to open everything to the lowest level. And then at this point, you'll have to kind of scroll down to see what you want. Now, some of these other options around credits and debits and switch signs, they're really only meaningful if you're going to output this data into a crystal type report, which is presentation worthy. So I'm not going to really get into that today. That's a bit more complex than I'd like to cover. But for just running the report like we did here, this is really all that you need to know, is this ability to add and remove accounts into the report. So let's talk a little bit about, well, what if something is missing out of the report? So if I collapse all here and we go back to our financial report, you can see when I run in this case, a balance sheet, there's a row at the bottom called not assigned functional area. So it is actually showing us that there are some accounts that are not being assigned properly. This particular one, because it's a balance sheet, this is showing us that there's a problem with these actual income statement accounts. So this may not be directly impacting our balance sheet, but if you have balance sheet accounts that had values in it for this period of time you were running, you would see those accounts here as well. So that's your first indication, is running the report. And obviously a balance sheet won't balance if there's missing accounts, but it'll tell you which accounts are not loaded. And then the second method would be to go in here and, just like I said earlier, by activating the actions assign account button, you can see anything that has not been assigned. So we know these ones need to be added onto that financial report. So maybe we'll take a step back and have a quick look at just creating a new account in the system. I'm assuming you probably already have some basic understanding of that, but when we go into our chart of accounts, and we go into edit the chart of accounts, if we want to create something new in the system, so maybe like a new inventory account. So I'll do 1 to 7,000, and I'll do it in my US chart of accounts. And so that's going to take a moment to save. So where ByDesign is different than a lot of systems, in a lot of other ERP systems, when you create the actual GL account, as part of creating the account, you may be used to seeing that indented structure for financial reporting already in a screen like this. So by virtue of creating the account, you're automatically adding it to the structure. So I would say that that is a bit of a disadvantage in one way, because you have extra steps to do. When you create a new GL account, you're going to now have to make sure you do that extra step to put it into your financial reporting structure. And I think I was talking, but you would get a little message at the bottom that kind of reminds you to do that as well. So if you fail to do that, not a big deal, because like I said, your balance sheet won't balance, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's a very simple thing to fix. Doesn't mean your financial entries that happened against those accounts are invalid or anything like that. You just have to fix your reporting structure, and then the problem is solved. You'll also see that you can get to those reporting structures from multiple different places. So inside this chart of accounts, there's also a menu path here as well. That takes you to that same location where you get to the financial reporting structures. But what the system won't let you do is be working in multiple screens at the same time. So you do have to make sure you did what I did, close out of the add new account screen before you come back in here. If you fail to do that and you try and go in here, you'll see a little message that says, system is locked by your username or changes can't be made right now, something to that effect. And that tells you that you've probably got a tab open on the bottom where you're working in one of the other financial screens. So if I want to go back into this account here and assign my new account, so there's my 127,000 new inventory account. So this is a disadvantage because you have to do an extra step, but where this works to your benefit is the fact that you can now have multiple reporting structures. So how would that look? So you could, for example, copy an existing structure. And if I want to say with assignments, it's going to bring in all of the GL accounts that have already been assigned to all of those parent categories. If I choose without assignments, it will not bring in the GL accounts. They will all be just sort of outside of the report. And the assumption is you want to go in and add all of those manually. So whichever one kind of follows the purpose that you need. So once you've created your new report, you would have to give it a number. So I'm going to call it Z or ZU11, and maybe we'll call this balance sheet for bank. And then we're going to go in and we're going to edit it. And then as I mentioned, sometimes it takes a minute for it to come up, so don't worry about that. And so now we have a exact sort of replica of the system. But what you could do now is you could decide to, maybe there's something that is showing as a liability, as a positive or a negative, and you want to move it over to the other side of your balance sheet. You could absolutely do that. So if you wanted to create something that displayed differently, not a problem to do that. So if I go over to my current liabilities, actions, assign accounts, it will let me assign any balance sheet account to any side of my balance sheet statement. So I could easily take these accounts and say that now they are liabilities for when I, display this balance sheet to the bank. So whenever you make any changes like that, the save button is actually one screen back. So you're going to hit the save here, and it'll go through and it'll save any updates before you leave this screen. So that's going to take a moment to save. For the other account statement, other ones, reports that also rely on a GL account rollup, that's going to be the GL account structure report, which is, it's not really the same as a trial balance. We can maybe go in and see how this one rolls up. You could have every single account. So I guess this is kind of a trial balance, but it's a trial balance that rolls up into categories. So some of our clients have a use for this. Some of them don't really care for this. The trial balance is also available. So this is replicating a lot of that functionality. You've got your indirect cash flow statement, works on the exact same principle as the balance sheet. So it's GL account based, meaning that at each level, you have to decide which GL accounts roll into these categories. Since statement of cash flow is something that's typically, sort of subjective to the user that builds it, these is a place where we probably see a lot of our clients going in and making a lot of changes in these descriptions and categories. So you're free to do that, and then add the accounts as they suit your purposes. And probably these other ones. So the other one that is the complicated one is the income statement, which does not rely on the GL account rollup. So with the time that we have today, we won't get into that. That's going to be quite a bit longer conversation, and we're going to talk more about next week about how the cost centers will drive things into different parts of your income statements based on how you design this report. So if you're interested in that, you definitely want to join us for next week's session, where we'll be talking more about that structure. So I'm just going to pause there and see. I've seen no questions have come up so far. Does anybody have any questions? Is there any areas around the balance sheet or these other reports where I maybe skimmed over and you're not clear on what I was saying? Okay, I don't see any of those questions coming up. So we'll stop there. As Kayla mentioned, we'll be uploading this to our YouTube channel. Please attend next week again, or if you're not able to make that, we'll be uploading that one as well, and we will get into kind of dissecting the complexities around the income statement. So thank you everyone for your attention today. Back to you, Kayla.
Great, thanks, Alex. And yeah, we'll see you next week for our part 2 of this financial reporting structure in SAP Business by Design. Have a fantastic week.